Okay. I will need a volunteer from the studio audience that has done evaluations before. It's fairly simple. All you need to do is be able to read English and pass out golf pencils and the bubble forms at the end. All right. Cool. Gruel and Groovy. Cool and groovy, excuse me. All right. Yes. Okay. So this is the last day of class. I'm going to basically do more or less 4 things. A recap of where we've been over the last, let's see, now at this point it would be 13,000 years. Real quick. And then what will go next term if you choose to follow along. And then do some final prep. And then instructor and evaluation, which we don't actually need to be broadcasting for, but since class is televised, we just do what we can. All right, so basically where we've been is looking at the field of ethnic studies, where it came from, concepts of Afrocentrism, which is not specifically African-centered, but looking at an emic viewpoint and a multidisciplinary viewpoint. So we use history as a way of tracking, but we don't necessarily go in a linear fashion. As you know, I just loop back because sometimes it's relevant, sometimes it's not. But sometimes where it's not, it actually connects to something that will bring you back to the main point, which has always been one of my things. So as an example, if your view of time, for example, in European axiology, is linear, right? So they say get to the point. Okay, except that the way an African would view this same thing, I say I'd start at point A, B, C, D, and the point would be either D or E, and continue on from there. You know, like Columbus discovered America, boom, 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 right? But an African might start in a spiral because their view of time is that time moves in a spiral. So that I might start at point A, but if you're an adult, you only tell children the point, a single point. An adult is supposed to be able to handle the context. So in order to show you that these points exist in the context, I'll tell you a story that starts at point A, and then B, and then C, and then D. Wait, will you get to the point? No, you haven't heard the whole story. You need the entire context. Okay, so for example, I was playing in my office earlier this composition from this CD, which we may do probably in a 3rd term. But if you want to pick it up, it's Black Men Who Mean Business. So it's like Cornel West, Tavis Smiley, and Michael Eric Dyson doing a 13-minute piece on nigger, on the N-word, you know, because Michael Eric Dyson teaches a class at Penn State on Tupac, in which his material basically is using, you know, so the white students are going, well, why can't we use nigger? And the black students are saying, look, it has to be a particular context, shared oppression, shared history. You're not learning that in a classroom. You have to live it. So we can use that word in this particular way, and you can't. But then they're also making the point, oh, well, corporate America is spreading this world all over the planet, using it as if it's okay. But, you know, can Jewish rappers say kike me? No. That's why they came down on Michael Jackson for saying kike me. Oh, well, can J-Lo use the word nigger? No, she's not black. Even if she is singing a Ja Rule song. Right? So there's multiple layers, you know. Andrew Young comes back after a day and sees Martin Luther King, and Martin Luther King says, "Nigger, where you been all day?" So it's used as a term of endearment, right? So there's context. So we've been giving you part of that context. So various constructs like Natarianism, Kawaida, rites of passage, the age grade set system of education, crash, isms, African psychology. So you've been getting that in addition to the usual, or actually unusual, I mean, I was raised with this, so it's usual to me, the unusual points of view of history and some of the stuff that's hidden. But it's available in books if you know where to look. So, and we'll look at where we go next term, and then final prep. So we start in 12,000 BCE and go to Reconstruction. And so one of the reasons for stopping at Reconstruction, besides you have to stop somewhere, is to understand kind of what is being reconstructed in that term. So it depends on, again, the hero as the teller of the tale. What's important for being reconstructed? So from this mainstream history point of view, the country is being unified, reconstructed from a civil war. Which, okay, the South says, no, it's about states' rights, and the North says, no, you need to end slavery. From a larger point of view, the Industrial Revolution is happening, and so we're going to find machines that can do the work of humans more efficiently, so it'd be stupid to depend on slave labor economically. Okay? Because the technology now has grown to the point where we don't need people. We got machines. This one machine can be, can replace all these people, which is kind of like, if you've heard the story or the song, the folk song of John Henry, he was a steel driving man, big black guy, sledgehammer, who can build the railroad, and there's a machine that's bigger than him that can build the railroad faster than he does, and so he's a steel driving man, right? And I can beat any machine. That's kind of a metaphor for what actually is happening. The shift between human labor and machine-based labor. You're facing a similar shift in that where it used to be the old model of a teacher lecturing in a classroom and you writing the stuff down by hand, now the shift is to computers. You can't even register in this school without a computer now. And when I first came here, it was by phone. You don't even do it by phone anymore. You could even register by your smartphone. I don't know if there's an app for that, but so we're already in this transitional time where we're not exactly sure where we're going to go. So the country is being unified and reconstructed from a civil war. So both the physical and legal infrastructure. And we've seen this within our lifetimes a couple of times. The exact same drama that was played out by the United States in the Civil War got played out in Iraq. How do you create a constitution for a country with 20 different ethnicities? It's like what was happening in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union fell apart. You have a unified, monolithic state that's imposing by force unity on all these ethnic groups that when it falls apart, now they're fighting against each other. Same thing with South Africa. Another point where, all right, we go from segregation, legally enforced segregation, type 4, to now we're a pluralistic society where everybody has the vote. How do we do that? What does that look like after hundreds of years? of doing it the other way. Do we know how to do that? These are questions, right, that come up in terms of nation building. Like, really, we're going to go over to Iraq and teach them to be a new country when they got sewers older than Western civilization? I don't think so. Now, I went to Africa and met the Awe people, and they said, we're the people that built those cities in Iraq 6,000 years ago. We got chased out, and we're fisher people, so we followed the coast of Africa from where Iraq is, around the coast of Africa to where we are today in Ghana, Togo, and Benin. And they still live on the beaches fishing. But they built the cities in Iraq 6,000 years ago. That's their identity. Right? Americans don't necessarily have a context for that, what that means to be able to remember that far and what it means for your daily life, right? The physical and legal infrastructure for basically converting slaves into citizens. But this is a not all men are created equal type of society, even though we've said that, because they are still structuring inequality. They've still got a mind barrier to cross. Some people have already crossed it. And this we can know from what's in the historical record from what they've written or what they've said. Like Sumner and Stevens, particularly Stevens. No, we need to be educated. Slaves need to be freed. They need to be educated. They need to be given the means of production. They need to vote. You saw what we were talking about the other day, on Monday, about, you're going to, in order to vote, you have to be able to read. Oh, that's a good idea. Do we bar people only that can read from voting? Well, what about women? Well, I mean, you see what the Taliban has done with a little girl who was learning to read. Imagine that happening here. Well, it did happen here. Once upon a time. Not getting shot in the head for attempting to read, but almost like it. So, not an all men are created equal type of democracy, nor an all my relations type of democracy. Neither I am because we are and because we are I am type of democracy either. So that's not what's being reconstructed. Certainly no, when Dumas is writing in The Three Musketeers, that famous line, all for one and one for all, I mean, that's kind of the same thing as the African, I am because we are and because we are I am, but put in a different way. Not all for one and one for all. We're not one United States here after the Civil War or Reconstruction. Though they say that is part of the mythology, but clearly that's not happening. So if we start with an African culture, part of what's being reconstructed from our point of view is, okay, we're coming from, Africans in America are coming from a continent where there's 2,000 languages, where we came from a culture that built complex urban, so I don't mind the stereotype of, the code name, the racial code name urban. Well, yeah, cities is what we do. When early Europeans first came to Africa, there's like villages with 100,000 to 250,000 people living along a river. When I was composing this lecture yesterday, I was thinking, okay, is there, I need to Google this, because I'm trying to wrap my mind around, okay, how many people were enslaved, and versus how many people were in Africa? Like, who's left? Right? Because you might get the impression that there was nobody left. Well, no. There are tons of folks left. Tons of them. And, even though we're talking, well, you'll see in the slide. So, 2,000 languages, urban and agricultural. right? Cities, city folk. So they're multicultural, because they have to be, multiple cultures, multilingual, multiple languages, at least 5, and mathematical, because, you know, we've got, before there's Islam, there is the concept of number, and even though we're using quote-unquote Arabic numerals and algebra, there are numbering systems, various other numbering systems within the continent too. So there's science, there's technology, you got things where you've got different cultures where you have 12 kinds of marriage being practiced still into the 20th and 21st century. You've got multiple forms of religion and spirituality, not just the Abrahamic ones. And the form of democracy and basically the politic, if you will, the political system tend to be egalitarian. What Russell Means was saying last week about what indigenous people were, indigenous people societies were based on a balance between male and female. A balance, not one or the over the other, though there was a shift. So many of these cultures, you could have women occupying any part of the society, including the head of the society. Women leading combat troops into battle, that was normal. Any position within society. So egalitarian, equal. For real, actually. So, in 1750, there is an estimated about 106 million people in Africa alone. In 1750. So when you look at the source of Africa, the source of our strength, so the values that are embodied within the pyramid system and Nitarianism, the Egyptian mystery schools, as well as, for example, the Kan people of Ghana, this Adinkra symbol, which symbolizes lifelong learning. Part of the source of our strength is knowing who you are, knowing so you can self-define who you are, and then expanding that knowledge on your own, not depending on systems to do that. Don't just read what's in the book, study yourself as well. Study other people. So the idea of where certain ideas came from within Nitarianism, the Trinity, Father, Mother, Child of True Humanity, Osar, Oset, and Heru, Osiris, Isis, Horus. Multiple gender expressions. Voodoo is a spirituality that's 100,000 years old. The Maroon life cycle, where you incorporate both the visible worlds and the invisible world in a never-ending cycle. Aramaic Yeshua, which leads to what gets expressed within the time period we're studying as liberation theology, which there are texts that basically date back to, if we're looking at America, liberation theology, 1823. So basically the belief in an African Yeshua and looking for African forms of Christianity, which essentially becomes an underground movement until the 1960s. But if we look at the literature, we find literature going back to 1823 and various other people expressing certain sentiments that reflect the African forms of Christianity, not the westernized, Romanized forms.